Hey, Fred, Jerry here. Taking a look at the box office results for this past weekend, October 17th through the 19th. And Blumhouse Studios has had a pretty shitty year at the box office. Wolfman, Drop, Woman in the Yard, Megan 2.0, all underperformed. And in the case of Megan 2.0, seriously underperformed. But they still have a couple of sequels to go. One just opened this past weekend, and that is Black Phone 2, which is a sequel to 2022's Black Phone, which actually did pretty well. Opened up in fourth place in its opening weekend, but had some pretty stiff competition ahead of it, including Top Gun Maverick. But Black Phone 2 opened this past weekend too with very little competition at all, not really any, and pretty much cruised to first place. That was anticipated. The gross, we were not sure of it. It ended up overperforming a little bit, bringing in 26.5 million on slightly over 3,400 screens and almost breaking an $8,000 per screen average. Now, that per screen average is good. It's not great, but I'm sure the studio is somewhat content with this gross, as it did come in a little bit over projections. And next weekend, as we'll discuss here in a few minutes, there really isn't much coming out, so there really isn't much competition for Black Phone 2 heading into next week. So the drop could be relatively low. Now, here's the thing though about Black Phone 2 is that it does bring in a higher production budget than the original. The original production budget was only 18 million. They spent 30 million on Black Phone 2, more than likely in the stars' salaries to get them to come back to do the sequel. But having that higher budget also means obviously the gross has to be higher. Will it get there? It has to make around 60 to 75 million probably just to turn a profit. Will it get there? I think it probably could, especially given the fact that we still have a couple more weeks until Halloween, and there really isn't a whole lot of competition coming up, especially in the horror genre. Now, internationally, Black Phone 2 did not do as well, 15.5 million internationally. So the global gross right now does sit at 42 million. So I do think that that number alone kind of paints a picture where Black Phone 2 will actually make a little bit of a profit. We'll see what happens next weekend and the percentage drop that this movie takes. Then in second place is last week's number one, and what a drop this one took. I'm talking about Tron Ares taking a 66% drop and only bringing in $11.1 million. That is barely a $2,000 per screen average. I believe this movie is dropping and is going to continue to drop quickly. This is not an impressive weekend for this movie, especially given the fact that the movie cost $180 million to produce, which really means it has to do right around 400 million to 450 million just to clear a profit. I don't see how this movie gets here. I really do believe that Disney Studios very well could be in trouble here. They are just not the juggernaut in entertainment that they used to be. Now, I'm not saying they're going to go bankrupt or anything. Clearly, this is a studio and an operation that has just tons of money at its disposal, but they really need to step their game up. Tron Ares really seriously underperformed. Moving on to third place, and another new movie which underperformed as well, and that is the comedy Good Fortune, which is directed by Aziz Ansari and stars Keanu Reeves and Seth Rogen. Keanu Reeves is a pretty big draw, at least with his John Wick movies. Well, that audience did not show up for Good Fortune, as this movie only brought in 6.2 million on a little less than 3,000 screens and a little more than $2,000 per screen average. This movie bombed, quite frankly. Now, it may end up making a little bit of money. We'll see. But the budget on the movie was 30 million. So if Black Phone 2 is going to struggle making a profit, Good Fortune is really going to struggle making a profit. I don't think it's going to get there. It would have to bring in about 60 to 70 million as a gross just to do it. Like I said, the production budget on this one is probably going to be the nail in the coffin. So, good fortune? I don't think so. And in fourth place is a movie that just keeps on going, and that is One Battle After Another, starring Leonardo DiCaprio, the Paul Thomas Anderson flick. This movie has gotten some really big Academy Award buzz, and I think that this movie is actually going to do very well during award season. It also is one of the early Oscar buzz movies that we've heard about that has actually done fairly decent at the box office, especially given that this movie is a 3 hour long movie. This past weekend, it brought in another $4 million here domestically, only a 41.2% drop, and its domestic total now stands at almost 62 million. But even more impressive is its international gross, which is 103 million, bringing One Battle After Another's total globally to 165 million. Now, production budget on One Battle After Another was 130 million. So this movie does have to have substantial legs to make a profit. But I do believe that One Battle After Another is a serious awards contender, especially given its legs that it's had at the box office. Then in fifth place is where we find Roofman, the action comedy romance starring Channing Tatum and Kirsten Dunst, which last week was in second place but drops 3 places to fifth, bringing in another 3.7 million this weekend. That is a 54.4% drop from last weekend, not that great, and a $15.5 million domestic total so far. Globally or internationally, it's not doing much at all because its global gross is barely over 16 million. The production budget on Roofman was 18 million. So it's going to, I think it's going to have a real hard time making a profit. Probably a little bit of a loss with this one. I anticipate that the movie will definitely drop out of the top 5 next week and could drop out of the top 10. If it doesn't, it's simply because, once again, no competition. All right, moving on to the biggest loser of the week, and that is without a doubt After the Hunt, the new movie starring Julia Roberts, another movie that was supposed to have a lot of Oscar buzz, or did have a lot of Oscar buzz, heading into the release of the movie, anyways. But then the Rotten Tomato scores came out, and right now it's sitting at a 40% Rotten Tomato score. This week, it barely made the top 10, only did 1.6 million over the weekend on over 1,200 screens, and only brought in barely $1,200 as a per screen average. Now, keep in mind, last week, After the Hunt opened in 6 screens, opened on 6 screens, LA and New York, and had the highest per screen average last week of, I believe, over $25,000 per screen. This weekend, more screens were added, over 1,200 screens were added, and a $1,200 per screen average. This movie is dying on the vine, to put it plain and simple. I think the Oscar buzz is pretty much done with this movie. It would not surprise me if After the Hunt pretty much disappears by November and that we never hear about it again unless it gets a second life on streaming. But I really don't anticipate a movie that has performed like this to do all that well during awards season. Now, this year's gross as compared to last year, we were actually 2% down from last year, even though our number one movie, Black Phone 2, did beat out the number one movie from last year this same week, which was Smile 2, its opening week. Smile 2 brought in around 23 million, so obviously Black Phone 2 did a little bit better. But when taken in totality, this week's total gross was 2% off of last year. However, for the year, we're still about 4% over where we were last year. However, over 20% down from 2019, the pre pandemic levels. So the box office still has not bounced back here in 2025. Hopefully, 2026 will be a different story. Next week, however, doesn't look like things are really improving all that much. We have a couple of more independent movies being released. Not saying they're not going to be interesting or they're not worth a watch. I just don't think they're going to make much of a dent in the box office charts. The first is Springsteen, Deliver Me from Nowhere, which is the biopic about Bruce Springsteen, which has gotten a little bit of awards buzz, but we've heard that before on some of these other movies that have released in the past few weeks, and like Smashing Machine and After the Hunt, and they didn't pan out. So we'll see if Springsteen Deliver Me from Nowhere is the one that does deliver. And then there's Begonia, the new movie starring Emma Stone, directed by Yorgos Lanthimos. They found the magic in Poor Things, even winning Best Actress for her. Will Begonia follow in those footsteps? We will see. This looks like an interesting movie. The critics are loving it so far, the ones that have seen it. So we'll see. Of course, anytime these two get together, there's a little bit of Oscar buzz. So we'll see what happens with that. Well, my friend, that's going to be it for this video, but I do thank you once again for joining me. And once again, if you did enjoy this video and you enjoy this kind of content, talking all about movies and Academy Awards and all that kind of good stuff, I invite you to go ahead and subscribe to my channel as well as like and share this video. So once again, thank you, thank you, thank you. I love you. Thank you for joining me, and I will see you next time. And until then, that's a wrap.